Rain slammed against the black van windows as Jimin grabbed Jungkook by the wrist and whispered, "If you walk out that door tonight, I don't think I'll survive it." Manager in the front seat froze, so did Jungkook. Outside, camera flashes exploded like lightning across the parking garage beneath the arena in Seoul. Fans screamed their names through the storm, unaware that inside the van, something far more dangerous than rumors was breaking apart. Jungkook slowly turned his head. Wet strands of dark hair clung to his forehead, his breathing uneven from the concert they had just finished. Sweat still shimmered on his neck beneath the oversized black hoodie he always wore when he wanted to disappear from the world. But tonight there was nowhere left to hide, not from the fans, not from the members, and definitely not from Jimin. The silence inside the van felt violent. Jimin's fingers were still trembling around Jungkook's wrist. He hadn't realized how desperate he looked until he saw the expression on the older manager's face reflected in the rearview mirror. Fear, not confusion. Fear because everyone had started noticing. The late-night walks, the locked studio sessions, the way Jungkook unconsciously searched for Jimin in every crowded room, the way Jimin smiled differently whenever Jungkook laughed. At first, fans thought it was harmless. Cute, even. Millions of edits flooded social media every day, turning their closeness into fantasy, into entertainment, into something soft and harmless. But fantasy became suspicion. Suspicion became division, and division became hate. Jungkook pulled his wrist free carefully, though his eyes never left Jimin's face. "You promised you wouldn't say things like that in front of people anymore," Jungkook whispered. Jimin swallowed hard. "I tried." That answer hurt more than anger. The van finally began moving through the underground exit, headlights cutting through heavy rain. The city blurred outside like smeared watercolor. Neon signs reflected across the wet streets while silence suffocated the air between them. Jungkook leaned back against the seat and closed his eyes for a second too long. He looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally, like someone carrying a secret too heavy for his chest. Jimin noticed immediately because he always noticed everything about Jungkook. The tapping fingers whenever anxiety got bad, the habit of biting the inside of his cheek when holding back words, the sleepless nights hidden behind casual smiles, the fake laugh, the empty stare. And lately, Jungkook had been staring into space more often, ever since the fan backlash started getting worse. A single photo had destroyed everything 2 weeks earlier, one blurry image, Jimin asleep on Jungkook's shoulder during a private flight. That should have been all, but fans analyzed everything. The way Jungkook's hand rested too close to Jimin's, the exhausted softness on Jimin's face, the way Jungkook looked at him when he thought nobody was watching. Soon hashtags spread everywhere, some defended them, others accused them of ruining the group, of seeking attention, of crossing invisible boundaries idols were never supposed to touch. The pressure became unbearable. Staff members started separating them during interviews. Managers changed hotel room arrangements. Even the members grew quieter around them, not out of hatred, but discomfort. Nobody knew what to say anymore. Nobody wanted to become part of the controversy, especially after Jungkook punched a wall backstage 3 days ago when he overheard staff discussing whether the company should reduce interactions between him and Jimin on camera. Jimin still remembered the blood on Jungkook's knuckles. The terrifying part wasn't the anger, it was the heartbreak in his eyes afterward. The van stopped at a red light. Rain continued pouring endlessly. Jungkook suddenly spoke without opening his eyes. "Did you read the comments today?" Jimin looked down immediately. That was enough of an answer. Jungkook let out a weak laugh that sounded almost empty. "They said you're becoming selfish because of me." Jimin's chest tightened painfully. "Read them anymore. You think I can avoid them?" Jungkook opened his eyes now, dark and tired. "They're everywhere." Neither spoke after that. The driver quietly turned the radio volume lower, pretending not to hear. Jimin stared at the city lights outside the window, but his mind drifted somewhere darker, back to the first time he realized this had gone too far. It happened months ago during rehearsals. Jungkook had injured his ankle slightly while practicing choreography. Nothing serious, but he tried hiding the pain because that was who he was, always enduring quietly. Always smiling through injuries like his body belonged more to the world than himself. But Jimin noticed immediately. Of course he did. He remembered kneeling beside Jungkook under the harsh white practice room lights, carefully tying an ice pack around his ankle while everyone else prepared for the next run-through. Jungkook had looked down at him silently then, not smiling, not joking, just staring. And for one terrifying second, the entire room disappeared around them. No music, no members, no staff. Only the unbearable awareness of how much they needed each other. That was the moment Jimin became afraid. Not of scandals, not of fans, but of the possibility that Jungkook had started feeling the same thing he did. The van finally reached the dorm building. Nobody moved immediately. The rain sounded louder now against the roof. Jungkook reached for the door first, but Jimin spoke again before he could leave. "Are you avoiding me?" Jungkook stopped. The question lingered heavily between them. Then Jungkook laughed softly without humor. "You think I'm strong enough to avoid you?" That hurt even more. Jimin looked down at his own hands. He hated how weak he had become around Jungkook lately. Hated how every glance felt dangerous now. Hated how one smile from him could ruin an entire day because Jimin would spend hours replaying it afterward like a starving man remembering warmth. Jungkook finally stepped out into the rain, but instead of running inside, he stood there, motionless. Water soaked through his hoodie instantly. Jimin frowned and followed him outside. Jungkook, no response. The parking lot lights cast pale reflections across the wet pavement. The storm had cooled the summer air, but Jungkook looked like he couldn't feel anything at all. Then Jimin realized something terrifying. Jungkook was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just silent tears mixing with rainwater as he stared at the dark city skyline. Jimin's heartbeat stumbled. Jungkook covered his face briefly with one hand. "I'm tired," he whispered. Those two words nearly destroyed Jimin, not because they sounded weak, because they sounded honest. Jimin slowly stepped closer. The distance between them suddenly felt fragile, dangerous, electric. "You don't have to carry this alone." Jungkook laughed bitterly. "That's exactly the problem." Jimin's breath caught. For months they had danced around the truth without naming it, hiding emotions behind jokes, behind music, behind lingering glances nobody was supposed to notice. But emotions buried alive eventually rot, and tonight, under cold rain and flickering city lights, everything felt close to collapse. Jungkook finally looked directly at him. His eyes were red, vulnerable, terrified. "You make me forget how to protect myself," he admitted quietly. Jimin couldn't breathe for a second. The world around them disappeared again. No fans, no cameras, no expectations, only the rain, only Jungkook, only the horrifying tenderness. Neither of them knew how to survive anymore, and somewhere far above them, hidden behind apartment windows and glowing phone screens, millions of people continued debating whether what existed between them was real. But standing there in the storm, with Jungkook shaking from exhaustion and loneliness, Jimin realized the truth was far worse than rumors. Because whatever this was, neither of them knew how to stop it. The elevator doors closed behind them with a metallic thud, trapping the sound of rain outside, but the tension followed them upward like a shadow neither could escape. Jungkook leaned against the mirrored wall in silence, water dripping from the sleeves of his hoodie onto the polished floor. His chest rose slowly, unevenly, as though even breathing had become exhausting. Across from him, Jimin kept his hands clenched inside his coat pockets to stop them from trembling. Neither dared to look directly at the other now, not after what Jungkook had confessed downstairs. The elevator lights buzzed faintly overhead, cold and pale against their tired faces. Somewhere between the 7th and 8th floor, Jungkook suddenly laughed under his breath. It wasn't amusement, it sounded closer to defeat. "You know what's funny?" he murmured. Jimin finally looked up. Jungkook stared at his own reflection in the elevator mirror instead of meeting Jimin's eyes. "I used to think fame would make me fearless." His voice cracked slightly at the end. Jimin felt something twist painfully inside his chest. Jungkook continued quietly, "But now I can't even walk beside the person I care about without feeling like the whole world is waiting to tear us apart." The elevator stopped. The doors slid open. Neither moved immediately. The dorm hallway beyond them was dark except for a single warm light near the kitchen. The others were probably asleep already after the concert, or pretending to be. These days everyone sensed the tension hanging around them like smoke after a fire. Jungkook stepped out first. His wet sneakers squeaked faintly against the wooden floor as he walked toward the kitchen without another word. Jimin followed several steps behind, heart pounding harder the closer they got to the shared silence of home. Dorm smelled faintly of ramen broth, detergent, and the lavender candle Namjoon always forgot to extinguish before sleeping. Normal smells, safe smells, but nothing felt safe anymore. Jungkook opened the refrigerator and stared inside without taking anything. His reflection shimmered faintly against the silver surface. Tired eyes, wet hair, bruised knuckles. Jimin noticed immediately that the cuts on Jungkook's hand had reopened from the rain. Tiny streaks of red stained his fingers again. "You're bleeding." Jungkook glanced down indifferently. "It's nothing, that's what you always say." For the first time that night, irritation flickered across Jungkook's face. "I'm tired of people acting like I'm falling apart." Stepped closer instinctively. "You are falling apart." The words escaped before he could soften them. Silence, heavy, dangerous. Jungkook shut the refrigerator harder than necessary. "You think I don't know that?" His voice rose suddenly, low and sharp. Jimin froze. Jungkook rarely snapped at him. That alone made the air feel unstable. "I can't sleep anymore," Jungkook admitted, breathing unevenly now. "Every time my phone vibrates, I feel sick before I even check it." He dragged trembling fingers through his wet hair. "I go online and people hate you because of me. Staff avoid talking to us together. Fans zoom into every second we stand next to each other like we committed some crime." His jaw tightened. "The worst part is," he stopped himself. Jimin's voice softened carefully. "What?" Jungkook finally looked at him fully, and the sadness in his eyes almost hurt more than anger ever could. "The worst part is I still want to be near you anyway." The room became impossibly quiet. Even the humming refrigerator sounded distant now. Jimin stared at him, unable to speak, because that confession carried something terrifying inside it, not just affection, need, raw and desperate and dangerous. Jungkook laughed weakly again, but his eyes glistened. "See, that's the problem." Jimin crossed the kitchen before thinking, 1 second of distance. Then suddenly he was standing directly in front of Jungkook, too close, close enough to see the tiny scar beneath Jungkook's lip, close enough to feel warmth radiating from his rain-soaked clothes. Jungkook stopped breathing for a moment, so did Jimin. You think you're the only one struggling, Jimin whispered. His voice sounded fragile now, more honest than intended. Jungkook's eyes flickered slightly. Jimin hated himself for what he said next, because once spoken, there was no taking it back. I've spent months pretending not to look for you in every room. Jungkook's expression changed instantly. The anger disappeared first, then the exhaustion. What remained looked almost shattered. Jimin continued before fear could stop him. When interviews end, you're the first person I search for. When something good happens, you're the person I want to tell first. His breathing became uneven. And when people started hatting you because of me, voice lowered, I started hatting myself too. Stared at him like the ground beneath him had vanished. Outside the kitchen window, rainwater slid slowly down the glass while distant thunder rolled across the city. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Jungkook whispered quietly, "Why are you saying this now?" "Because I can't survive pretending anymore." The answer stayed trapped inside Jimin's chest. Instead, he shook his head helplessly. "I don't know." That was partly true. The real truth was much uglier. Jimin had noticed the change in Jungkook weeks ago, the sleeplessness, the panic hidden beneath casual smiles, the way he lingered alone after schedules ended. And Jimin was terrified, not of scandal, not of rumors, but of losing Jungkook emotionally before either of them figured out what this relationship had become. Jungkook suddenly looked away first. That alone shocked Jimin. Jungkook almost never retreated from eye contact. But now his breathing had turned shallow, unsteady, like Jimin's honesty had cracked something open inside him. Then quiet footsteps echoed softly from the hallway. Both turned immediately. For a split second, panic flashed across Jungkook's face. But it was only RM standing there in grey sweatpants, half awake, holding a glass of water. Still, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Reality rushed back in. Namjoon's eyes moved between them carefully. The soaked clothes, the tension, the dangerous closeness. Understanding flickered silently across his face. Nobody spoke, not at first. Then Namjoon sighed quietly. "You two should sleep." His tone wasn't judgmental. That somehow made it worse. Jimin stepped back immediately. The warmth between him and Jungkook disappeared at once, replaced by cold embarrassment. Jungkook looked exhausted again. Namjoon rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly before speaking more softly. "The company called earlier." Both of them froze. A terrible feeling settled in Jimin's stomach instantly. Namjoon hesitated. "They want a meeting tomorrow morning." The room went completely silent. Jungkook's jaw tightened immediately. Jimin felt nausea crawl through his chest. Because they already knew what the meeting would be about. The rumors, the backlash, the growing tension online. And suddenly, standing under the cold kitchen lights with rainwater still drying on their skin, both of them realized something at the exact same moment. The world around them was no longer ignoring what they were becoming to each other. And tomorrow, someone would finally try to stop it.
The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and cold air conditioning. Too clean, too quiet. Jimin sat perfectly still at the far end of the long black table, fingers intertwined tightly beneath it so nobody would notice the slight trembling in his hands. Across from him, Jungkook leaned back in his chair with crossed arms and an unreadable expression, though the dark circles beneath his eyes betrayed another sleepless night. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the morning skyline of Seoul looked grey and distant beneath lingering rain clouds. Nobody spoke for the first minute. The executives exchanged careful glances instead. That silence alone told Jimin everything. This was not a casual meeting. A senior manager finally cleared his throat. "We'll keep this brief." Jungkook's jaw shifted slightly. That meant he was already angry. Jimin noticed immediately, always immediately. The manager slid a tablet across the table. Thousands of posts flooded the screen, articles, hashtags, edited videos, fan comments dissecting every interaction between them, some supportive, many cruel, some terrifyingly obsessive. One headline remained visible longer than the others. Fans concerned BTS dynamic is changing due to Jimin and Jungkook's growing distance from members. Looked away first, not because the headline hurt, because part of him feared it might be true. Another executive spoke carefully, choosing every word like stepping through broken glass. "The company is worried about the atmosphere escalating further." Jungkook finally laughed quietly, coldly. "What now?" Nobody answered immediately. That hesitation said enough. The manager folded his hands together. "We think it would be healthier if interactions between you two became less emotionally dependent in public settings." The room instantly felt smaller. Jimin felt heat rush behind his ribs. Emotionally dependent, the phrase sounded clinical, like something diseased. Beside him, Jungkook's expression became dangerously blank. "We work together," he said flatly. The manager replied carefully. "But recently there's been concern that the public focus on your relationship is overshadowing group activities." Relationship, even that word landed heavily. Jimin suddenly became aware of every tiny sound in the room, the ticking clock, rain tapping faintly against glass. The tightening of Jungkook's fingers against the chair arm, then another sentence arrived like a knife. "We also think some distance may help emotionally." looked up slowly. There was something terrifying about how calm he appeared now. What exactly are you suggesting? The manager hesitated again. That you spend less private time together for a while. Silence, absolute silence. Jimin's stomach twisted violently. For a moment nobody moved. Then Jungkook stood up so suddenly his chair scraped harshly against the floor. The sound shattered the room. The word came instantly, sharp, final. Everyone froze. Jimin stared at him in shock. Jungkook rarely challenged staff directly. He usually endured pressure quietly until it destroyed him internally, but not this time. The manager sighed carefully. Jungkook, no, he repeated, voice lower now. You don't get to decide who matters to me. The room's tension became suffocating. Jimin could actually hear his own heartbeat now. One executive leaned forward slightly. This isn't punishment, we're trying to protect both of you. Jungkook laughed again, but this time the sound carried genuine anger beneath it. Protect us from what? Nobody answered because everybody knew the answer. The fans, the headlines, the rumors, the impossible expectations idols were forced to survive under. Jungkook looked around the room slowly, eyes dark and exhausted. Or asking us to pretend we don't care about each other because people online feel uncomfortable. His voice remained calm, but that calmness felt more dangerous than shouting. We're not asking that. That's exactly what you're asking. Jimin's chest tightened painfully. Because Jungkook was saying everything Jimin himself had been too afraid to admit aloud, the manager's expression softened slightly. You both look exhausted. This situation is affecting the team. That sentence finally hit somewhere vulnerable. Jungkook's anger flickered, just slightly, because no matter how overwhelmed he became, he loved the group too much to ignore that. Jimin saw the hesitation instantly, and it terrified him. The manager noticed too, so he continued carefully. We are only suggesting temporary boundaries. No late-night live streams together, fewer public interactions for now, separate arrivals when possible. Every sentence felt colder than the last. Jimin lowered his eyes toward the table. Because suddenly memories kept attacking him all at once. Jungkook falling asleep against his shoulder during flights, laughing together in practice rooms at 3 a.m, sharing earbuds during long drives, quiet conversations nobody else heard, comfort that had slowly become necessity. And now strangers wanted to measure and reduce it like adjusting stage lighting. Jungkook finally looked toward Jimin, not angry, not desperate, just hurt. That expression nearly broke him. Then the youngest member spoke softly. What if I don't want boundaries? The room went still again. Jimin stopped breathing because that question no longer sounded professional. It sounded personal, dangerously personal. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody knew how to respond anymore. The manager rubbed tired eyes before speaking quietly. This situation has already affected fans emotionally. Some are leaving, some are attacking other members. We need stability. Finally understood then, this wasn't only about rumors anymore. The fandom itself was cracking apart. People had begun choosing sides, analyzing every interaction, turning affection into evidence, turning comfort into controversy. And somewhere along the way, Jimin and Jungkook themselves had stopped knowing where performance ended and real emotion began. Or maybe they knew, maybe that was the problem. Jimin suddenly stood up too, not angrily, but carefully, like someone trying not to shatter. Everyone looked at him immediately. He bowed slightly toward the staff. We understand the concern. Jungkook turned toward him instantly. Pain flashed openly across his face now. Jimin ignored it because if he looked too long he might lose all control. We'll cooperate professionally. The words tasted horrible. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. The manager exhaled quietly in relief, but Jimin couldn't breathe properly anymore. Because the moment he said those words, he felt something inside Jungkook collapse. The meeting ended shortly after. Nobody spoke while leaving the room. The hallway outside felt painfully bright after the cold tension inside. Managers dispersed quickly. Staff pretended not to stare. Only Jimin and Jungkook remained near the elevator lobby in silence. Jungkook refused to look at him now. That hurt more than anger ever could. Finally Jimin whispered carefully, "Say something." Jungkook laughed softly without humor. "You already decided everything in there. That's not fair." Jungkook turned then, his eyes looked wounded, not furious, worse. "Do you know what hurts most?" he asked quietly. Jimin's throat tightened. Jungkook stepped closer, voice low enough that only Jimin could hear. "You looked more scared of people seeing us than losing me." The words struck like a physical blow. Jimin opened his mouth immediately, but nothing came out. Because part of him feared Jungkook was right, not entirely, but enough to hurt. Jungkook looked away again, jaw tight. "I'm tired of feeling like something shameful." Then he walked past him, just like that, no dramatic goodbye, no shouting, only silence and retreat. But somehow that silence felt catastrophic. Jimin stood frozen in the empty hallway long after Jungkook disappeared around the corner. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, cold, endless. And for the first time since all of this began, Jimin felt genuine fear crawl through him. Not fear of scandals, not fear of fans, but fear that he may have just pushed away the one person who truly understood him. That night the dorm felt unfamiliar, too quiet, too careful. Jimin sat alone on the edge of his bed, staring at the dim glow of the city outside his window while his untouched dinner slowly turned cold beside him. Usually, after difficult schedules, the dorm carried warmth. Laughter from the kitchen, music leaking softly from someone's room, Jungkook singing absent-mindedly down the hallway at 2 a.m. because silence made him restless. But tonight there was nothing, even the air felt tense. Jimin rubbed exhausted hands over his face and closed his eyes briefly, but the moment he did, he saw Jungkook's expression in the hallway again. "You looked more scared of people seeing us than losing me." The words refused to leave him alone. Because deep down Jimin knew why they hurt so much. They were true, not completely, but enough. His entire life had been built around surviving expectations. Cameras, fans, perfection, every smile measured, every mistake immortalized online forever. And somewhere along the way, fear had become instinct, fear of disappointing people, fear of becoming selfish, fear of wanting something he was never supposed to want, especially someone. A soft knock suddenly interrupted the silence. Jimin looked up immediately. For one dangerous second, hope surged through him, Jungkook, but when the door opened slightly it was only V. Taehyung leaned lazily against the frame holding 2 cans of beer. "Well," he said quietly, "you look terrible." Let out a weak laugh despite himself. "Thanks." Entered without waiting for permission and placed 1 drink beside him before sitting cross-legged on the floor. For several moments neither spoke. Taehyung wasn't the type to force conversations. He preferred silence when silence was needed, but tonight even he looked concerned. Finally he glanced toward Jimin carefully. "You two fought?" A question. Jimin stared down at the cold beer can in his hands. "I don't know what we're doing anymore." Taehyung tilted his head slightly. "That sounds serious." Laughed quietly, but there was no happiness in it. "It is." The room fell silent again. Outside, distant thunder rolled softly across the sleeping city. Taehyung studied him for a long moment before speaking carefully. "You know everyone's worried, right?" Jimin's chest tightened. "About the rumors? About both of you?" That answer surprised him. Taehyung leaned back against the bed frame. "Jungkook hasn't really been himself lately." Crawled instantly through Jimin's stomach. Taehyung continued quietly. "He hides it better around cameras. But here," he shook his head slightly, "he barely sleeps." Looked away immediately because he already knew. Some nights he heard Jungkook walking the hallway alone long after everyone else slept. Restless footsteps, restless thoughts, restless heart. "He thinks too much," Jimin whispered. Taehyung's expression softened. "Do you?" That earned silence, then Taehyung sighed quietly. "I'm going to say something honest, okay?" Jimin nodded slowly. Taehyung hesitated, searching carefully for words. "I don't think fans pulling away is the real problem anymore." Jimin frowned slightly. "Then what is?" Taehyung looked directly at him now. "I think both of you are terrified because whatever this became stopped feeling simple a long time ago." The room suddenly felt smaller. Jimin swallowed hard. Taehyung rarely spoke seriously about emotional things unless they mattered deeply. "You know what Jungkook's biggest flaw is?" Taehyung asked softly. Jimin shook his head. "He loves too intensely." Jimin's heartbeat stumbled. Taehyung continued before he could respond. "When Jungkook cares about someone, he gives them everything. Time, loyalty, energy, pieces of himself." His gaze lowered briefly. "Sometimes so much that he forgets how to protect his own heart." The words landed heavily because Jimin knew they were true. He had seen it for years. Jungkook loved with frightening sincerity, whether it was music, friendship, family, or people he trusted deeply. He threw himself into emotions completely. And lately Jimin had started realizing just how dangerous that kind of love could become. Taehyung finally stood up slowly. "You should talk to him before this turns into something worse." Looked up immediately. "Where is he?" Taehyung hesitated, then he glanced toward the dark window. "Studio." Of course. Whenever Jungkook felt overwhelmed, he disappeared into music like it was the only place nobody could judge him. Taehyung paused at the doorway before leaving. "Oh," he added quietly, "and stop pretending you're the only one hurting." Then he left. The room became silent again. But now Jimin's chest felt unbearably tight. He looked toward the clock. 1:47 a.m. Most of the building would be empty by now. He should stay here. He should give Jungkook space. He should listen to the company. Instead, 20 minutes later, Jimin found himself standing outside the private studio downstairs with his pulse hammering violently against his ribs. The hallway lights were dim. Soft music leaked faintly through the closed door. Not singing, just piano, slow, lonely. Jimin recognized the melody instantly. Jungkook had written it months ago during a difficult tour, though he never released it publicly. He claimed it was too personal. Now the unfinished song drifted through the quiet corridor like a wound refusing to heal. Jimin slowly pushed the door open. The studio was dark except for the pale blue glow of equipment screens. Jungkook sat alone on the floor near the couch instead of at the mixing desk, knees drawn slightly upward, headphones hanging loosely around his neck. He didn't notice Jimin immediately, or maybe he did and simply didn't react. The music continued softly around them. Jimin's throat tightened at the sight of him. Jungkook looked exhausted, not the kind sleep could fix. His hoodie sleeves covered most of his hands, but Jimin could still see faint redness around the bruised knuckles beneath. Empty coffee cups surrounded the couch. The air smelled faintly of rainwater, caffeine, and exhaustion. Jimin stepped inside carefully. Taehyung told me you were here. Finally looked up. His eyes looked dull from fatigue. You shouldn't be here. Quietness of his voice hurt more than shouting. Jimin closed the studio door behind him. I didn't want you alone. Looked away immediately. That's the problem. The same sentence again, but this time it sounded weaker, sadder. Jimin slowly moved closer until he stood beside the couch. You didn't let me explain earlier. Jungkook laughed faintly under his breath. What explanation would make it better? Jimin opened his mouth. Nothing came out immediately because the truth was ugly. He had cooperated in that meeting because he was afraid their closeness would destroy Jungkook's peace, afraid fans would continue tearing him apart online. Afraid their group would suffer, afraid his own feelings had already crossed a line he didn't understand anymore. But underneath all those fears existed one unbearable truth. He could not imagine losing Jungkook, not emotionally, not quietly, not like this. Jimin finally sat down slowly across from him on the floor. The soft piano melody continued between them. Then, very quietly, Jimin admitted something he had never said aloud before. When things get hard, he lowered his eyes. You're still the first person I look for. Jungkook stopped moving completely. Jimin forced himself to continue. I tried to create distance because I thought it would protect you. His voice trembled slightly now. But every second today felt wrong. The studio became painfully quiet. Jungkook stared at him for a long moment, emotions shifting silently across his face. Then he whispered, almost like he hated himself for asking it. Would you still choose distance if nobody was watching us? Jimin's breath caught instantly, because suddenly the question had nothing to do with fans anymore, nothing to do with scandals. It was only about them. Raw, terrifying, real. And for the first time since all of this began, Jimin realized he no longer knew how to lie to either of them.
The studio felt impossibly small after that question. Outside the window, rain continued sliding down the dark glass of Seoul, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of gold and silver. The unfinished piano melody looped softly through the speakers, fragile and aching, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Jimin couldn't look away from Jungkook now, because Jungkook's question had stripped everything else away. No company, no fans, no cameras, only truth. Would you still choose distance if nobody was watching us? Jimin lowered his eyes briefly, breathing unevenly. Then he answered honestly. The word landed softly between them, but it changed everything. Jungkook's expression cracked almost instantly, not dramatically, not visibly enough for strangers to notice, but Jimin saw it. Relief, pain, fear, hope, all colliding silently behind exhausted eyes. For months they had hidden behind uncertainty, pretending confusion could protect them from reality. But reality had already arrived, quietly, slowly. In the way Jungkook searched for Jimin first after every performance. In the way Jimin memorized Jungkook's moods before Jungkook himself understood them. In the unbearable comfort they found in each other when the world became too loud. Jungkook looked down at his hands. They're going to keep hatting us. His voice sounded small now, not weak, just tired. Jimin moved closer across the studio floor until their knees almost touched. I know. Fans are leaving. I know. The members are worried, nodded slowly again. I know. Jungkook finally looked at him, eyes shining faintly beneath dim blue studio lights. Then why does being near you still feel like the only thing that makes sense? Jimin felt his chest ache. Because he had spent so long searching for the perfect answer, something safe, something logical. But love, whatever shape this had become, was never logical. It was terrifying precisely because it existed anyway. Jimin reached forward carefully then, fingers brushing against Jungkook's bruised hand. This time Jungkook didn't pull away. The contact felt heartbreakingly simple, warm skin, shaking fingers, two exhausted people trying to survive emotions larger than themselves. Jimin stared quietly at the bruises on Jungkook's knuckles. You should stop hurting yourself when you're angry. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Jungkook's lips. You should stop blaming yourself for everything. Laughed softly through tired eyes. Fair. Tension in the room eased for the first time in weeks. Not because their problems disappeared, they hadn't. Tomorrow the headlines would still exist. Fans would still argue online. The company would still pressure them. Nothing outside this room had changed. But inside the quiet glow of the studio, something finally became honest. Jungkook leaned back against the couch slowly, exhaustion finally visible without resistance. You know what scares me most? He asked quietly. Jimin shook his head. That someday this pressure will make you regret me. Confession hurt more than Jimin expected. Because beneath Jungkook's strength, beneath his fame and confidence and endless determination, there was still someone terrified of becoming too much for the people he loved. Jimin understood that fear better than anyone. Without thinking, he reached up and gently pushed damp strands of hair away from Jungkook's forehead. You're not something I regret. Jungkook's eyes closed briefly at the touch. And in that tiny moment, Jimin realized how exhausted he truly was, how long he had spent carrying fear alone. The room became quiet again, but this silence felt different now, softer, safer. The piano melody finally ended, leaving only distant rain against the windows. Then Jungkook suddenly laughed quietly under his breath. What? Jungkook opened his eyes again. We're terrible at this. Jimin smiled for the first time that night. At what? Pretending. Honesty of that answer made both of them laugh softly, tired and breathless and painfully human. And maybe that was the real reason everything became so difficult. Not because they cared about each other, but because they cared too much to fake indifference convincingly. Jimin leaned back beside him against the couch eventually, shoulders touching lightly in the dim studio. Neither moved away. Outside, dawn slowly began bleeding pale blue into the edge of the sky. Morning was coming. Schedules would continue. Cameras would wait. The world outside this room would remain complicated and demanding and cruel. But for now, in the quiet hours before sunrise, none of that mattered. Because after months of fear, distance, and silence, they had finally stopped running from the truth. And strangely, the truth did not destroy them. It simply left them sitting side by side in the fatting darkness, listening to rain against the windows, holding onto each other gently like two people who finally understood that some connections are too deep to erase, no matter how loudly the world demands it.